Hello, I'm Simi Das with Inside Scoop. Joining me is Jay Greene, senior writer for CNET. Jay, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Jay recently returned from 2 weeks in China where he was researching a series of reports on the life cycle of an iPhone. And we want to focus now on what happens at the end of that life cycle. What happens when we're done with it? So I think 10 years ago it was more common for people to hang on to phones for a little bit longer, but now it seems like whenever a new phone is announced and released and available, you ditch your old one. Where do those phones end up?
Well, so it's an interesting question. And it used to be that many of them wound up in the third world. Many of them wound up in some of these, horrific e-waste dump sites. There are actually rules right now, and Apple, to its credit, for example, will recycle all of the phones that it receives in the region in which they are received. So if you've recycled your iPhone 3G when you bought a new 4S in the US, it would have been taken care of in the United States. It would have been recycled here. Now that said, there's a difference between reusing an iPhone, or any phone for that matter, and recycling it.
So reusing is preferred, apparently the more environmental option?
That would be the logical conclusion, but if you speak with environmentalists, they don't necessarily agree with that. They're concerned when an iPhone gets refurbished. Typically what happens is it gets sent to a developing nation. Folks in the US generally don't want to buy the 3-year-old model. They want the new one. And so the cheaper iPhones, and again, this is true with all sorts of devices, not just iPhones, but the cheaper phones wind up going to developing nations. And the fact is, in those countries, they aren't really equipped to handle the recycling in an appropriate way. And so often these phones, when they wind up there, they create this sort of toxic hazard.
So what did you see when you were in China?
So what I wanted to do was sort of understand what happens to phones there. China's obviously a huge country. iPhones are enormously popular there. So when someone gets rid of their phone, often they'll go to an electronics market, and there are many of these around the country, and they'll sell someone their iPhone, and then they'll buy another one. When those phones are sold, they tend to get consolidated, and the parts that can be used, great, those get reused.
So they get taken apart?
They get taken apart. Essentially, they go to these chop shops where they get pulled apart. The pieces that can be used, great. The pieces that can't be used, those eventually make their way downstream.
You had an interesting description of a chop shop that you actually went inside. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it was interesting. So I went to a town called Guangzhou, which is in the southern part of China, and I visited a chop shop. I literally walked in. We actually found this place. Some contacts located this, and it was an odd place. I mean, it was really a concrete garage, maybe 40 feet by 25 feet. I was there at the beginning of monsoon season. It was baking hot, and you walked in there, and there were about a dozen people, mostly women, a lot of them sitting on the ground or on makeshift stools from old CRT terminals. And when I was there, they were breaking apart computers. They weren't breaking apart phones at that time. But really what they were doing is they were trying to separate the plastic from the metals from the wires. And that those pieces would then be recycled to the best of the ability that they had. But again, there are very few places in China that can handle recycling appropriately. And so often as this stuff gets moved downstream, it leaches into the groundwater. It gets taken apart in ways that aren't environmentally friendly.
And in this chop shop, were there safety precautions that were being taken? Were workers wearing masks?
Well, so I mean, there were workers wearing sort of hospital masks. I'm not sure if that had anything to do with what they were doing, or often you'll see people like, walking around China like that as well. It wasn't a work environment that you or I might find familiar. Like I say, they were literally sitting on these concrete slabs. It was baking hot. They had a big fan that didn't really seem to be doing a whole lot of anything except blowing hot air around. It was an odd and somewhat frightening place.
Thank you so much, Jay.
Yeah,
we look forward to the piece. For Inside Scoop, I'm Simi Das. Thanks for watching.